Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? One of the big questions as we near the trade deadline for the NFL is for the teams that are in fact out of contention, how do they approach the remainder of the season? Do you fire sale your roster, try to accrue assets, draft assets and draft capital, things like that moving forward? And one of the questions, there was a piece today at ESPN.com. It was Dan Graziano and Jeremy Fowler, two NFL reporters over at ESPN.com, posed the question, would the Lions look in the trade market for an edge rusher to replace Aiden Hutchinson? We all know Aiden Hutchinson, unfortunately, was the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year, suffered that awful leg injury this past weekend. Reports are he could return for the Super Bowl should the Lions make it there, but long way in the distance, they got to get there. So could they trade for an edge rusher? He notes that the Lions should call the Raiders and ask about Max Crosby. I mean, the Raiders just traded Devontae Adams. They're 2-4. Things continue to go poorly. Would they try to accumulate assets for a player like Crosby? Azeez Ojulari, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, some of the other names mentioned. Or I should say, because Azeez Ojulari being behind Burns and Thibodeau in New York with the Giants, Ojulari was the name they mentioned. Well, Graziano threw out Chase Young. He said, what about Chase Young? The Saints really like the guy, could be interested in signing him to a long-term deal. But if they check in and don't feel good about their chances of doing that, could he be on the move for a second deadline in a row? Of course, last year, Chase Young started the season in Washington, was traded to the 49ers, of course, made it to the Super Bowl and lost, and this offseason signed a one-year deal with the New Orleans Saints. A one-year prove-it deal for Chase Young. And it's been a bit of an uneven start in New Orleans for Chase Young, but maybe the most important thing to remember right now is that he is healthy. He's got 10 tackles, 1.5 sacks so far through 6 games. And he's playing a rotational role, but playing more and more as Cam Jordan plays less and less. So you're seeing more of Chase Young and Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan kicking inside or playing more of a rotational role. I don't think this is going to surprise you, but my feeling right now is that you would absolutely do a deal like this. Because here's how I would approach the trade deadline for the New Orleans Saints. You're 2-4 right now. You're an underdog against the Broncos, what would put you at 2-5. Before the season started, my contention was, as you were sort of mapping out the schedule, you just wanted to have your head above water. Like, could you get past Denver into your mini bye at 4-3? Could you just get there with your head above water? And we know what happened. You started 2-0. You lost Eric McCoy in the game against the Eagles, which was disappointing, but you still had a chance to win that. You almost impossibly lost to Atlanta in a game where you did not allow an offensive touchdown. So the possibility of being there was there. You were close. No one's going to fault you for losing to Kansas City. But if you're 2-5, there's no real probability to think that you're going to be able to win 8 games. You're not going to go 8-2 the rest of the way. So the Saints organization would have to look at it and say, okay, are we close to competing? Or is it time to push a bit of a reset? Let me say it a different way. Are you a Chase Young away from competing? And I think the answer is obviously no. You have him on a one-year deal. It's very affordable. Another team would take on that contract at the trade deadline to add a player that could be an impactful one and help them make a run. It's not that dissimilar from what you see the trade deadline in Major League Baseball all the time, in particular with relievers. There are players that, I remember that the Cubs did this in their World Series year with Aroldis Chapman. Chapman was a closer for the Yankees. The Yankees traded him to the Cubs at the deadline. He pitched for the Cubs. The Cubs won the World Series, became a free agent in the offseason, signed back with the Yankees. He was basically a lease player. So if you're the Saints and you want to extend Chase Young, there's no reason you couldn't do it and re-sign him after the season. You'd effectively be loaning him to another team if he wanted to come back for the second half of the season, let him go try to compete to win a championship like he did a year ago in San Francisco. So I think the bigger question is there a team that would give you an asset for Chase Young? And if the answer is yes, then you do it. I get asked that a lot by Saints fans. Should the Saints trade off some of their players? And my answer is, well, of course you should, but the problem with structuring deals the way the Saints do and restructuring contracts is you load yourself with dead cap money and bad contracts. So you're not just trading, remember, you're not just trading the player, you're trading their contract as well, which makes it really difficult to trade a player like, say, Marshawn Lattimore. Because if you're going to trade Lattimore, you're not just trading the player, you're trading the contract. So a team would have to give you an asset to get the player and his contract. So like Lattimore in 2025 has a cap hit of $31 million. And then in 2026, it's $28 million. The Saints could off-ramp after this year, but the point being, if you traded him, someone would be taking on this bad contract. And that's what's very difficult to do. But if you have a one-year borrow player, prove-it deal player like Chase Young, yeah, you could move him. And I think the Saints should. I don't know that they would go hit in the draft, but the only path out of this is what we saw them do in 2017 when you had back-to-back-to-back 7-9 seasons. How did you get out of that? You hit with an historic draft. I'm not saying it's got to be the 2017 draft, but you got to get starters on rookie contracts over again as the cap continues to increase so you can reset your cap, be competitive in free agency again. Yeah, you got to get a quarterback. Maybe it's Spencer Rattler. You're financially bound to Derek Carr for another year. So it's far from over. But if you can obtain an asset for a player that's not going to help you do anything of significance and may not be with you next year anyway, yeah, do it now. The question is there a team willing to give you an asset for Chase Young? The Saints should absolutely be sellers at the deadline with anything anybody wants to buy, including Chase Young. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.